Brett, when you're talking about these things, this takes a lot of practice, what we're talking about here. And at first, it's going to feel extremely awkward and you're going to stumble and you're going to do, what would you recommend somebody do to develop this muscle?
Okay, so I'm going to break it down exactly what I did and how it helped me to negotiate some of the best exits in the last 24 months that literally my business was on the line and it was going to go one way or the other. And instead of giving to fear and living in what I felt like would be an integrity to stay in this relationship, I was able to move to freedom and total relief. And imagine the 500-pound backpack on your back, right? And you're just like, so I think the first thing is vision for what it could be, when you're out of whatever that you're in, or vision of how great it could be, even how much better it could be. So have that vision, right? So what I started to do is I practically would listen to, this is the masterclass, Chris Voss, download the masterclass app. I think it's like $170 a year. They have like, Steph Curry, Chris Voss. They have Coach K from Duke. They have Mark Cuban. I mean, they have amazing world-class people. So Chris Voss just has a couple on there. So I would just start listening. And then so I would listen and I would, my workout in the morning, and it would come to mind some question that he would ask or the way that he would say it. And I would write it down and I'd go to my notes. I'd write it down. And I was having these calls pretty, every couple of weeks through this 6-month period of time. And then I just started practicing it. And so part of it became a little bit of gamesmanship because I found myself in the same position. All of a sudden, the high emotion, the lots of talking, and the constant let's just say emotional, like little jabs and things. And I remember like the heart rate, I'd put my phone on mute. Okay. Put my phone on mute and I would breathe. And he just kept talking. I just remember he just kept talking and I would just breathe in and I would breathe out, like literally just doing like breath work while he's just going and going and going and going and going. And then I'd have my questions, or not questions, I'd have my labeling and mirroring ready to go. And I'd be taking some notes, on the side as he's going and taking some detailed notes. And then finally there would be the space. And then I would just literally read it. And it helped me to lower my heart rate, lower my emotion, and not agree or disagree, just literally label it. Because here's the reality. Nothing's a fire drill. And the other side typically wants to make it a fire drill. And if they're trying to make it a fire drill, they might be manipulating you, right? And if they're manipulating you, it's probably not someone you can trust. But most things in life are not fire drills, right? And the more someone's talking, the more likely that they really don't believe what they're saying or they're trying to push something over. So and they don't give you just like a direct answer, it's likely they're not being fully honest or they're being completely dishonest. And so, yeah, those are my practices. I would also go, my wife and I had a funny story. I was the entrepreneur. You share the stuff with the spouse. The spouse she's kind of not into it. But I'm like, okay, we're going to go, we're searching for a car. We moved to Florida. We're going to buy a car. The car salesman, and I sit down and I use a little bit of the negotiation stuff. It's called the Accusations Audit, where you're basically saying something, you're trying to prepare them for what you're about to say that they're not going to like. And it's super awkward. That's probably one of the most awkward ones. But I'm like, I'm going to try this. It's a low stake thing. I was like, I may or may not buy this vehicle. Or sitting there like, I don't know if you're going to like what we're willing to pay for this vehicle. And I don't want to waste your time. And I just want to make sure that you don't feel like we're trying to take advantage of the car dealership. My wife is sitting there like, she's the complete introvert and she's completely just embarrassed, but she can't say anything because we're sitting down at the table after we test drive the Ford Expedition, right? And he's like, just say it. Like, you're not going to bother me. But I kept trying to build it up because that's what Chris says to do. Finally, I deliver the price. And he's like, no, we can't do that. It didn't really work, but it was super awkward. And then we left there. We went and bought a vehicle like down the road and it worked out for the one that we bought.
Right.
But the point of all that is I think you got to be willing to jump in and just try it. It's going to be awkward. Practice it in low stake positions. And then it becomes more natural as you're in higher stakes positions. So that would be my feedback for people.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you shared that story because we were in a similar situation just recently. You catch yourself using some of these strategies or techniques in every day. I thought it was kind of funny is by the time we got back from our test drive, I knew how the salesperson was incentivized. I knew how important the sale was for their end of the month quota. And it wasn't like me asking these questions point blank. It was just they were offering it up just based on the series of events.
100%, right? That's the neat part. It doesn't have to be, oh, because I got this information, I'm going to use it against you. It's more like, now that I know this information, let's find a creative way to help both of us win in an equitable way as best we can. It's never going to be fair. There's always going to be a side maybe gets a little bit more. It's never going to be exactly equal, but it can be a win-win if you can get creative in the solution that you guys can come. And really, it's about trying to come alongside someone shoulder to shoulder versus, face to face, right? Face to face feels like more like we're combative versus, hey, let's see this from the same side of the table and let's look at this and let's look for some creative options to choose and look at. And that's about trying to slow down. The Bible says be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. It helps tremendously with this because I've got to slow it down and, quick to listen, slow to speak, and hopefully don't become angry at all. There's times to become angry and there's time that anger can move you if it's moving you in the right direction. But I think that is the piece of it that helps you emotionally to get a more of a level space. And again, it doesn't feel like you have to respond positive or negative. It gives you a chance to come in very neutral without having to make a major decision or say something that all of a sudden that now becomes the baseline for the next part of the negotiation. Instead, it's like, nope, let me mirror and label this. And then the next piece would be dynamic silence. This is really key. Dynamic silence can magnify the impact of your mirrors and labels. Additionally, use dynamic silence to let it sink in. Let it sink in. People might walk away from a good deal if they feel they've been treated unfairly. Anticipate your counterpart's demand for fairness. Dynamic silence, after saying no, let it sink in. So let that really sink in. And this demonstrates that you stand by your word. Dynamic silence can also increase fear of loss without having to make direct threats to your counterparts. So after you deliver great labels or great mirrors, or in combinations, just be quiet. And I remember sitting and being quiet, and it felt really awkward. Usually it takes about 7 seconds, honestly, for the brain to actually catch up to what someone just said. So that's just something to think about. 7 seconds. So if you can count to 7 in your brain, and it's really awkward, like if we sat here for 7 seconds, it'd be awkward, but that's sometimes what it takes. And then that person might say something. Okay. And then they might go down another thing, and then you might mirror and label that as well. And you just keep building on mirrors and labels, especially if you feel like the person is not being necessarily truthful or fully transparent. And especially if you feel like they're pressuring you to have to make a decision right now, you just keep doing that. And I'd say, hey, wow, it really sounds and feels like, this is really meaningful to you. Hey, I'm really sorry. I'm out of time right now. I'd be happy to continue the conversation. I need to jump on this next call here. How about we pick this up tomorrow? I remember ending it with this, and perhaps tomorrow I could spend a little bit of time sharing my experience. This conversation was 3 people on the call, and it was so well placed because 2 of us just sat there for probably 55 minutes of the 60 minutes. And the other person just talked. And so we came to the very end of it. And it's like jujitsu. When I did it, it was like I was able to turn the leverage back because we had literally just listened. I was respectful. I didn't react. I didn't fight. I just respectfully asked if we could continue the conversation at a later time. And if that conversation would be willing to hear, which was really neat about it. The second person who was listening to me jumped up right away. It was like, yes, absolutely, Brett. Sorry you weren't, but basically apologizing to the other person who was on their side. Sorry that you weren't able to, really be heard. I hear what you're saying. The other person was talking the entire time and dominated everything. We'll jump on another call with you. And now the leverage had turned, the power dynamic had turned. And because I was respectful, because I mirrored and labeled, because I actually heard them, I didn't try to fight or combat. So we get on the call the next day or 2 days later or whatever, and they actually do hear me, right? And I'm actually able to lay it out succinctly what's going on. And so the negotiation now shifted, and it was great. So that would be my encouragement to everyone listening is realize that sometimes you might have a single conversation, but you can't fit in A to Z in a single conversation. Sometimes it might just be A, B, C, and that's okay. doesn't mean you can't have the next conversation at a different date to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's really like one of those things that's the hardest thing to get used to is being uncomfortable in those silences. It is. And there's no shaking that no matter how long you practice this, it is going to feel awkward. It's going to be uncomfortable, but giving that time for everybody to have that breath is extremely powerful and important, and things will be brought to your attention and said that you probably wouldn't have uncovered just by asking more questions. You just got to let
Yeah,
everybody have a second.
absolutely. And also, I had another intense one just about a month ago, and there was like a big event, high emotions, high stakes, and I mirrored and labeled just to slow myself down. And then I gave myself about 60 days to even go back. I mean, I sent an email and said I would follow back up. Gave myself 60 days to process everything that had happened. Right. And so you understand that it's not just in a silo. And so knowing that if you're in an emotional state that's not going to be productive, that you've got to be willing to give yourself time. And that's hard for me because I'm the type of person, Jack, that wants to, like, if there's a problem, like, I want to go solve it now, like today. I don't want to have it lingering. So it's not easy for me. Now, so other people are like, there's a problem. They run from the conflict. They're like, I don't want to face it. Each of them are, each extreme is not great because the one that wants to solve it now, well, guess what? The other person may not be ready to solve that. Right. And the person who doesn't want to solve it or even face it at all, just sweep it under the rug, you got to solve it. So there's someplace in the middle. Right. So knowing that and sensing where emotionally the relationships are at and when would be the wise time. Like, so the question that we ask yourself would be this: given our history, given where I want this relationship to go, given the current circumstances, what's the wise thing to do? Right. Again, given our history, given the current circumstances, and given where I want this to go, what's the wise thing to do today? And sometimes the wise thing to do today is to not have that conversation right away, right? To give yourself emotional time for the emotions to go back from seeing red back to the more of an even state of emotion where you can prepare your mirrors and labels. Where, for me, it's prayer. For me, it's meditation. It's visualizing, a ton of prayer, and then writing down my thoughts, writing down the things, thinking about, hey, from their perspective, like what could it be? Also coming with an open heart to say, how do I play a role in this? Like, what could I have done differently to approach this in a way that perhaps I'm not seeing? Asking for wise counsel and getting their perspective on it. And then boom, collectively coming back and now engaging in the conversation, asking for the right to share what happened and if they would be open to that. And now you're in it. So that would be the other thought too. It does take the prep. It does take, to me, it took a lot of prep for these really high stake ones. And that's the hard part sometimes, is having the patience to do the prep.
Mm-hmm. And one of those simple tactics, frankly, is something that I do. I do it on a daily basis because you'd have a tendency of responding, whether it's email or text or, with Microsoft Teams and Slack, and you got all of these things coming at you. More times than not, I will type out my response and not send it right away. I'll go do something else for a minute, come back to it, make some changes before sending it, because sending out of reaction is just a terrible idea.
Absolutely love that. And by the way, to add to that, I do the exact same thing. And sometimes I actually never send it. And just the fact of journaling helps me. In fact, 60 days ago, when I had that really intense one, I wrote up this entire email of all the reasons why I was right and they're wrong and blah, 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 and all the things. I remember praying about it, thinking about it, asking my wife and my mentor about it. And they're like, that's not the email. I'm like, oh man, I really wanted it to be the email. Like, that's not the email to send. Actually, bless them, thank them. You're moving on regardless. You're moving on, right? The values weren't aligned. You're moving on. Bless them. Thank them. Now, by the way, it only takes 2% of values being off to ruin the whole thing, right? And that's what unfortunately happened. The values weren't aligned and it crushed it. But 98% was amazing. And I do love and care for these people, right? So it's like, focus on that, especially when you're in that high emotional state. Take the high road, right? Pray for them. Bless them. Thank them. don't take the low road, right? Because oftentimes, if what you did was right, by you taking the low road can justify what they did. And that's the tough part. Like, you don't want to do that and or give them license to do it again. Instead, you're not going to change their heart or probably change their mind. That's they just chose to do the thing they did. But if you pray for them, bless them, especially in a high stakes emotional state, move into a space, for me, it took me 60 days, and then come back and then mirror and label and work through it. We've been able to respectfully reconcile the personal relationships, business relationship. The official one is ended, but this new fresh chapter has opened up, and I learned a lot. I learned a ton, by the way. That's also a thing. Like, look at these things as like, these are opportunities. That didn't happen to me. That happened for me. I had an amazing education on so many things, right? And I had a chance to practice these intense conversations using Chris Voss's stuff. And I'm stronger for it now. I'm better for it. So